Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a pretty heavy economic weight that's currently resting squarely on the shoulders of millennials and Gen Z. We're going to pull back the curtain on our daily spending habits and really look at the hidden architecture behind why we buy what we buy, especially when the world around us feels, well, stressful and totally uncertain.
You deserve it. Man, it's an incredibly familiar whisper, isn't it? It's that little voice in your head justifying the late-night impulse buy, the $8 morning coffee, or that sudden online shopping spree after a really grueling day. But here's what the research actually reveals. That voice? It wasn't necessarily your idea. It's actually a carefully engineered mantra.
And that brings us to a kind of uncomfortable question we've got to ask ourselves right out of the gate. When you hit add to cart, are you genuinely treating yourself, or are you just temporarily numbing yourself? Like, are those purchases actually a reward, or just a temporary painkiller for modern economic anxiety?
Let's get into part one, the treat yourself trap.
So what started as a playful social media habit of buying little treats has evolved into this widespread cultural phenomenon with a much darker name: doom spending. It's basically the act of spending money impulsively to cope with stress about the future. But our sources point out something totally fascinating here. This isn't just a simple lack of willpower. For a lot of people, particularly Gen Z, this is a calculated attempt to buy comfort and exert some kind of agency when traditional milestones, like homeownership, just feel entirely out of reach.
Now, the psychological data behind this is absolutely wild. Research shows there's this misery is not miserly effect. What that means is when people are sad or stressed, they are willing to pay up to 30% more for a product than they would if they were just in a neutral mood. Buying something puts us back in the driver's seat when things feel completely out of control. It delivers this quick hit of dopamine that sadly fades just as fast as it arrived.
Moving on to part two, engineered desire and doom spending.
So, how exactly did we shift from a culture of saving to one of constant, non-stop consumption? Well, a major factor is lifestyle creep. This is the phenomenon where your spending increases right alongside your income. Those things that used to be rare, special luxuries suddenly become perceived necessities. And it's insidious because it silently inflates our needs. Even with higher paychecks, the feeling of scarcity literally never leaves us because our baseline for what we need just keeps rising.
And you know, this wasn't an accident. Historically, early advertisers, guys like Edward Bernays back in the 1920s, figured out how to hack human behavior. They stopped selling the rational features of a product and started selling feelings. They sold freedom, status, and comfort. The entire modern economy is essentially built on identifying our insecurities and our exhaustion and then selling us the cure. When our willpower is totally depleted at the end of a long day, we just naturally reach for that easy dopamine hit.
All right, let's look at part three, the true cost of comfort.
Let's actually walk through the compounding math of what financial experts like to call the latte factor. A seemingly harmless $4 daily purchase feels like background noise in your budget, right? But $4 a day is $20 a week. That's over $1,000 a year. But the real devastation happens when we look at the opportunity cost. If you invested that same $4 a day over a 40-year working lifetime at a 7% return,
you'd have roughly $750,000. Yeah, you heard me right, $750,000. Hitting you with that staggering potential future value completely reframes those microtransactions, doesn't it? It's mind-blowing.
So the crucial takeaway here is we've got to shift our internal monologue. The question shouldn't be, can I afford this $4? The real question is this worth trading a piece of my finite life? Because every dollar spent is time you spent working. When you buy that coffee, you're literally trading minutes of your irreplaceable life for a temporary comfort.
Which brings us to part four, real versus fake self-care.
We really need to distinguish between consumer-driven coping mechanisms and authentic restorative practices. Fake self-care is buying an artisanal $50 candle or constantly ordering takeout. Sure, it provides a fleeting dopamine hit, but it actually depletes your future resources. Real self-care? That's going to sleep early, taking a walk in nature, or building an emergency fund. Real self-care builds your resilience and your options, and unlike that candle, it rarely costs a single dime.
And finally, part five, embracing financial minimalism. So how do we actually put this into practice? Well, we can embrace financial minimalism. Now, don't worry, this isn't about extreme frugality or living like a monk. It's an intentional approach to break the cycle of self-sabotage. It just means clearing the financial clutter and focusing your attention, your money, and your energy exclusively on the purchases and experiences that add lasting, genuine value to your life.
A really great visual framework for this is the classic 50-30-20 budgeting rule. Basically, you allocate 50% of your income to actual needs, 30% to your wants, and 20% directly to savings or paying down debt. This structure is awesome because it still allows space for planned, guilt-free indulgences without letting lifestyle creep totally take over your entire paycheck. Now, to curb that impulse buying, the sources suggest some highly practical boundaries. First, implement a 24-hour cooling-off rule for any purchase over $100. Just sleep on it. Next, set manageable time frame goals rather than total restrictions, like saving the takeout for the weekend instead of banning it entirely. Substitute treats with free pampering, maybe a midday nap. Do a ruthless audit of your monthly subscriptions. And finally, put your savings on autopilot so the money is stashed away safely before you ever even see it.
Another incredibly powerful tool comes to us from Stoic philosophy, negative visualization. This is the practice of regularly imagining losing the things you currently have, not to make yourself miserable, of course, but to recognize that your current baseline, having food, shelter, running water, is an incredible privilege. It quiets that constant consumer need for more, and it removes the guilt of simply enjoying what we already have.
All of this leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to consider before your very next purchase. When you reach for your wallet, are you buying your future freedom, or are you just funding a comfortable cage? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to break down the systems shaping our world.